Let's learn about the Pacers' new players from those who know them best, people who covered them at their last stop today. Locked On UConn host, going to talk Tristen Newton. Locked On Pistons host, going to talk James Wiseman. And Locked On Jayhawks host, going to talk some Johnny Furphy to give you guys more details on all the Pacers' new players on today's Locked On Pacers podcast.
You are Locked On Pacers, your daily Indiana Pacers podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What up, y'all? Happy Friday. Congrats, you made it through the week, and welcome into another edition of the Locked On Pacers podcast, where we, of course, talk about the Indiana Pacers. As always, my name's Tony East. I cover the team for Forbes and SI, and today, one of my favorite offseason shows that we might have to do a part two of, learning about the Pacers' new guys from people who know them best, people who covered them at their old stops. So today we get Mark Zanetto from Locked On UConn to talk more about Tristen Newton, his 2 years with the Huskies, what he will bring to the Pacers. In the Pacers, of course, limited experience watching him in Summer League. Khahil from Locked On Pistons joins to talk James Wiseman, how he got better last year, where he needs to get better, where he can and won't help the Pacers. And then Derek Johnson from Locked On Jayhawks to talk Johnny Furphy, his rise through Kansas from joining the team late, bench player, starter. Now he's in the NBA. You guys have seen these guys a little bit because of Summer League, but lots of great intel from these guys. And of course, if the Pacers add any other players this summer, I'll do another one of these with Enrique Freeman. We don't have a Locked On Akron, but Enrique Freeman and some other potential additions that may happen. This is a pre-recorded episode. I'm actually on vacation if this is out on Friday, assuming there's no breaking news. So apologies for the jumping around of my hair length and shirts in this episode, but I had to get it done in time. And if something happens over the weekend that's breaking news, you might not get it till Monday because I will be away from Indianapolis. We'll see what's able to happen. But thank you guys for listening. Hope you guys enjoy and learn something. This is always one of my favorite episodes to do every summer. Let's hop right in. Let's talk some Tristen Newton with Mark Zanetto, who's covering him over at Locked On UConn. Tristen Newton, 49th overall pick. And Mark, the place I actually want to start is something that made him an appealing pick to me. And that is the way he described it and others around UConn have described his 2 seasons with the Huskies. That is, that he had 2 totally different roles on 2 teams that played very differently. What stood out to you about the way he was able to not only play well, but adapt to kind of 2 different teams in his time at UConn?
Well, first, thanks for having me. And yeah, I think Tristen is a really interesting case, right? He comes in, he played at East Carolina and North Carolina area, in the AAC, so UConn was familiar with him from the old conference, right? And they played against him and really kind of saw the traits they were looking for, which is no fear when it came to taking shots at the end of the shot clock, right? So they run a very strategic offense that tries to get high performance 3s and 2s. So we're talking a kid that came in and fit that mold right away, but this year they were in, and this is what NBA scouting evaluations told him when he came back, which is you need to work on your communication skills, your leadership skills. And he implored that right away. Like he was on the ball a lot more at UConn, his graduate season, like his last year, winning a 2nd straight national championship for us. And it really kind of shows his versatility. He can play on the ball. He can play off the ball. He's a true combo. The only thing that still kind of baffles me is he is so laid back, and the juxtaposition of him with Danny Hurley was always very interesting to watch. Like nothing bothers Tristen. So I think Pacers fans will love him if he does get an opportunity to make your roster and kind of be a backup guard.
Yeah, I'm always infatuated by that kind of player, right? The tall guard who can pass it some, shoot it some, although he was better, at certain years than others in his college days. And hitting the glass certainly matters. The Pacers are not a good rebounding team. They're searching for that. So kind of the do-it-all guard is interesting, but I always wonder with that kind of player in the NBA, as with most very good college players, are any of those skills actually NBA level or just very good college level skills, right? And so that's why Summer League was really interesting for him because shots didn't fall, that the passing in traffic was really good, and he got to the foul line a ton. So I'm curious, kind of maybe not score, that's too direct, but like shot creation-esque skills you saw from him and how those got better at UConn, because if he's going to be just like a jumbo creator at the pro level, which is a very appealing type of player, how he got better in those ways under Hurley.
Yeah, I think he recognized what he his limitations, right? I think that's what Dan Hurley does is he brings guys in and says, listen, you're not Michael Jordan. You're not going to be, dunking on people. So Tristan is a below the rim threat. Let's be honest, right? He doesn't do Cam Spencer, who's having a great summer league in Memphis, is the exact same type of guard. They were perfect for each other. They played off each other in the respect that they're not throwing lobs to each other, right? It's who is going to beat their man off the block, and also are they going to be able to kick out because they see a better opportunity, or are they going to try to score on their own? So he's a great decision maker. I think that's the biggest thing. And when you're getting a guy who's 24 years old versus like a 20-year-old, you're getting a ready-made NBA player that may have, some drawbacks. Like he may get beat off the dribble a little more. He's not as quick as maybe a 19 or 20-year-old kid, but he makes the right decision more times than not. And I think that's something that you're going to get at the NBA level.
I'm curious. I don't know how much you keep up with the Pacers specifically, and not asking you to dive into them, but how you think he'll fit in the NBA game versus the college game, more spread out, faster, all that kind of stuff. Because part of what makes UConn so good is Hurley just can, let me run one of my 6,000 plays and I can change it to who's on the floor and design all this awesome stuff. And that's great. And it makes players look great, but then they get to the NBA and the Pacers are way more free flowing and random. I'm curious how you think, because some of his stats look like they'll fit great with the Pacers, like play style stats, not just generic stuff like transition plays great and all that, but some of it not so much. Where do you feel like his game will translate the best and worst?
Yeah, I think in the best, I think because he's the type of player, like I said, that doesn't let anything bother him. There's no emotional ebb and flow in his game. He's pretty laid back right away. He's a Houston kid. It's one of those things where that's where I don't think if he has like a high volume night where let's say, I know there's load management in the NBA. If Tyrese Haliburton has a night where he's sitting and Tristan Newton gets to play more because of that, and he shoots only 38% or something like that, that's not going to bother him the next day. Or if he only plays 10 minutes and he makes two out of three from three, like those are, you're not going to get these kind of, huge waves from him. I think what he does, I think the worst thing he does, and this is something that I always felt like, is he relies too much on his hands in terms of his defense. So playing on ball defense is something that he is going to have to get better at with his lateral quickness. But as far as, Hurley's offense versus the NBA, Hurley just does that because he likes control. Like there's nothing about UConn's right. There's nothing about UConn's offense that is college-esque. They play a European style, very kind of free flowing. Whoever is open shoots. It's not like you have to get it into the middle and dribble 4 times. You know what I mean? It's not formulaic. So that they're not going to have an issue with at all.
Did you watch any of his summer league games by chance?
A little bit. I've been able to watch more of the other guys. He's one of the guys I've only been able to watch a little bit of, and mostly because even like the first game that was televised, he didn't play a ton. So I was just like, oh man, this sucks. But I did watch his last game where I think he had something like 19 points, but he had like 18 shots too. So that's Tristan's game. It was his game at East Carolina, and it was his game at UConn. The bigger the game, the better Tristan plays, and if he gets the green light, dude, he's going to shoot. Like that's the bottom line. That's why I thought it was a natural fit. I picked that this would happen, by the way, on my locked on draft. I said the Pacers were going to, I also said they were going to pick Cam Spencer. I thought they were going to go back to back just to give me all UConn. But I picked Tristan at 49 with the Pacers because he fits. There's some sort of kind of like no worries type of mentality with this Pacers team that I watched a bunch last year that I think he fits in because he honestly does not care. He's put in the work and he just lets the chips fall where they may.
I think they had some intrigue in the UConn program, right? Like they had Cam and Tristan in for a pre-draft workout. I might be they didn't have Klingon in, obviously, or Castle, but I think they had some intrigue in what that was and what that could look like, certainly. And they like to basically every year under the current front office, they've had a guard on a two-way, right? Both because even if there's a chance you hit on a cheap guard, that's great. Right. And because if you kind of alluded to this already, but that is the position where you can't just be screwed if there's injuries. Like you need someone at all times. So I would assume just based on his draft slot that he'll be on a two-way. I guess I don't certainly know that yet, but that seems like the most logical conclusion. But that's fine. I think him playing a year in the G League, getting some NBA style under his belt, because the Mad Ants play very similar to the Pacers, will be good for him. What do people not really know about him, right? Like when you play 2 years at a program that just dominates college. Like, people can see what your game is, how you change and evolve and adapt. And I can look at his basketball reference page and see stuff. What do people not know about Tristan Newton?
Yeah, there's a great I think what's funny is, like, college players don't do a ton of like in-game interviews, but during the championship week, Big East tournament and whatnot, they grab a few players from time to time. And I'll never forget, even last year, UConn was as dominant as they were. People were kind of always trying to like put holes in their, can anyone beat them, blah blah blah. And so it was the first game of the Big East tournament, and they're playing Xavier. And the in-game reporter asked him, "You guys are having a really tough shooting night. Is there something that you want to talk to us about? Changing strategies?" And he looked at her like, "No, like, what do you like?" He said, "We work way too hard during the week to stop shooting." So he's like, we'll end up making shots. And sure enough, they won by 30 in that game. And Tristan had a phenomenal game where he came out and hit some big threes. So, like I said, it all comes down to his mentality. And it was perfect for UConn, and I think it's perfect for Indiana in that region of kind of guys who are just like, listen, lunch pail guys. I'm just going to put on my hard hat and go to work. And if Tristan could, do anything other than play basketball, I don't know what he would do, but he'd excel at it, because nothing bothers him. Like I said it like 100 times, but it's just, it's silly how little things don't bother him. People try to get into his head, and he just kind of like laughs at them. It's as what do the kids say? He lives rent free in your head. Like I think that's what I find from him.
His summer league was interesting. Caitlin Cooper and I talked about it earlier this week. Shots didn't go in. Free throw line was his best friend. Lived there in a major way. Be very curious to see what Tristan Newton's Pacers tenure ends up being. And Mark knows all about it. Mark, where can people find you and your coverage of UConn and more, including on this podcast network?
No, I appreciate it, man. Check me out at my Twitter handle is at Mark Zanetto CBB, or you can look at Locked On UConn is the podcast is Twitter handle. And then I'm obviously I record every day like you do, and on the grind here on Locked On Podcast Network, and find us on YouTube, Apple, Spotify, wherever you get your podcasts.
Unfortunately, many of my Indiana listeners are Purdue fans who may not be the biggest fan of you specifically right now, but you will not get better insights than with Mark every single day. Next up, it's time for James Wiseman with Khahil. Thank you all for tuning into this segment. We'll be right back. Hey guys, let's take a short little break so we can talk about FanDuel. The playoffs are done in the NHL and the NBA, and we all love sports. We love them so much that we never want them to stop. But with the playoffs wound down, there's fewer games. The WNBA is off for the Olympics. MLB's just come back from All-Star. Sports aren't sportsing like we want. Thankfully, the Olympics is back. And thankfully, FanDuel lets you keep the sports going whenever you want. All you have to do, open the app and dream up bets anytime you're in the mood. How about that? And this summer, FanDuel's making it even better. They're hooking up all customers with a boost or a bonus every single day. There's something for everybody every day, all summer long. So head over to FanDuel.com and start making the most out of your summer on FanDuel with daily boosts and bonuses, an official sports betting partner of Major League Baseball. Currently, the only new free agent the Pacers have added this summer, it's James Wiseman, the former number 2 pick, which is the rosy way to describe him, a man who is still struggling to find his NBA footing, as he said in Summer League, coming to Indiana for development purposes. Now with the Pacers, spent the last year and a half with the Pistons, where Khahil at Locked On Pistons talked about him all the time, except not all the time, because Wiseman wasn't always in the rotation in Detroit. What do you think? First of all, what do you think of this? James Wiseman coming to Indiana specifically, a place that he said he's seen other players develop and he would like to do that himself.
So like my initial thought process was when I saw that he went to the Pacers was what I told you right before we started recording, like, oh, a lot of offense. So like the Pacers, obviously, I think were the best offensive team in the NBA this past year. Don't think they were very good defensively, and that kind of matches up with like what Wiseman has, kind of been throughout his career. Although he has not been that great offensively, even though that's kind of like the archetype that he's, people would describe him as. So I thought, okay, that kind of makes sense with what he's trying to do. So that was my initial thought.
It's interesting because he's huge and kind of fast, right? So like in theory, that should be something good. but he has very little range, or has shown very little range. And as you know very well, he turns it over all the time, right? And so it's hard to make that a positive player without cleaning up one of those huge weaknesses. And then that doesn't even speak for the part that you said. And the biggest reason he struggled in the NBA, and I want to lob this to you, is like his defense has just been terrible. What can he do anything on that end of the floor? Like, why can't someone with his size and physical traits defend at all?
So I think the thing with James Wiseman that I think Pacers fans and you are going to see very quickly with him is that it just seems like he doesn't understand how to play. Like, I think that's the most kind way to put it. Like, I understand he was a late bloomer. He didn't play a lot in college. And it shows almost every time he plays. Like, he's still learning how to just play the game of basketball. Like, there's a few times on defense where he will make a good play around the rim simply because, like you said, he's big. He's long, he's big, and he's athletic. So he's going to make some plays around the rim just because of that. Even if he gets beat off the dribble, even if his drop coverage is at a terrible angle, if he overcommits somewhere, at times he will be able to just make up for it just because he's athletic and he's big. So that kind of stuff will happen. But there's often times that, or most of the time, not just with his defense, but with his offense too, but mostly, where you'll see with his defense, where it just seems like he's still learning how to play. I think you guys will run him in drop coverage. I can't see him running anything else. But there's times where you just see that he doesn't really completely understand how to play in this coverage, or he's still learning how to do it. And that's his biggest problem so far. I will say this past season with Detroit, towards the end of the year, it showed some progression. He looked better at the end of last year than he did at the beginning. I will give him that. He definitely looked better as the season went on. It's just that it still didn't get to a point of, like, I don't think I would ever call it good, but it got better than it was.
The thing with guys like him, this is the case for a number of big men when they get to the NBA. Like, they're so tall that all their life growing up, they're just better than everybody, right? So they don't have to, like, be really sound in the scheme or, like, be locked in defensively. They're just like, oh, I'll just take one giant step backwards and block everything, right? So, like, they don't have to get as good at that stuff, and they get to the NBA, like, oh crap, like, yeah, I do. And some of them do, and some of them don't. And you're right about drop coverage. I think that's where they're going to have to use them the most, because they sometimes with their second unit, because Isaiah Jackson can do switch with their 5, and it does give them some success because he's really mobile and can hang with guys on the perimeter. Like, that's not something they should try to do with Wiseman very much when he's out there. So how they specifically deploy him defensively is going to be fascinating, because they're not a good defensive team, but they want to be better. And he is, to his credit, a pretty good rebounder, and they suck at that, but they have to get a stop to have that opportunity, right? So how that all meshes together will be absolutely fascinating in his trajectory. So he started, you correct me if I'm wrong, but he started last season completely out of the rotation to Detroit, right? It was Duran and Bagley and Stewart. So
Correct.
Him playing was mostly about transactions, but did he do like anything well last year? Like, what is the selling point of, like, because the Pacers are trying to win, right? That's why this signing's been interesting to me, is they brought in a development piece when they're trying to win games now. What does he do well? And can the Pacers, can they be like, oh, we need this specific thing, we're putting in James Wiseman?
So just to give some clarification on how the beginning of the season started with that whole thing, Marvin Bagley was the backup center. He was playing really well. And for some odd reason, Monty Williams just stopped playing him so he could give James Wiseman a chance. That's the best excuse I can give for it. It was puzzling at the time.
You had a lot of rotation questions last year, yes.
Yeah, it was puzzling at the time. It's still puzzling to now. But he did eventually get in the rotation just because Monty wanted to give him a chance. What I would say he does well, look, he's a freak athlete for his size. He really is. He can move really well. He runs, like you mentioned earlier, very fast, end-to-end speed, very quick, very fast. He can beat guys down the floor and get easy buckets that way. It's tough with Wiseman because he'll flash the tantalizing skill. He'll flash some really interesting stuff, but none of it is more than flashes. Like it's just he hasn't been able to sustain any of it for a long period of time. I think something that he was starting to learn this past season, which I think is his best way to last in the NBA. For a while, he just never rolled. He would set a screen and then stop halfway through to try to get a midi jump shot, get a bounce pass so he can go ISO. he would try to stop halfway through and try face up and post up a guy. He wouldn't roll to the basket. This past year, he did get better as the season went on. And just, I'm setting the screen, I'm rolling to the basket. And he's a good lob catcher. He's a freak athlete. He can finish anything around the rim. If he gets something around the rim, he's going to finish the ball. He has really good touch around the rim. I would say that. Very nice touch. If he does get the ball within 3 feet, it's probably going to be finished. I will give him that. So lob threat, dump offs, even offensive rebounds, like that kind of stuff, he's going to be able to feast off of that. I will say, like, if you give James Wiseman like 8 minutes of action, he'll probably score 10 points. Like he'll be able to do that just off of offensive rebounds, putbacks, dump offs, screen and roll, like stuff like that. He can score just like that, just like off those kind of things. It's just a matter of, okay, can he set screens? Can he set them at the right angle? Will he actually roll all the time? Or will he want to post up? Will he want to try to go one-on-one? And that kind of thing. And another thing he does offensively that you'll see, I'm sure, unless he wipes it out, which would be good, but I'm sure you'll see it, is that he messes up spacing sometimes, because instead of moving out the way, he'll try to front in the paint and try to post up, get someone on the back as someone's driving, and kind of messes it up. It has to move out the way. That just comes more with feel. His feel for the game just isn't all the way there. But I would say his best attribute right now is his finishing around the rim, his touch. He's a good lob catcher, like I said. He'll finish off dump offs, and he will finish putbacks. Like, that's the best thing about him. And he can take advantage of mismatches. If someone switches a guard on him, he will take advantage of that too.
So what I think is interesting about everything you just said, and I have one more question based off of that in a second, is, part of his appeal of the Pacers was seeing Obi Toppin comes here, clicks with Tyrese, clicks with the team, is a better player. Aaron Nesmith comes here, exact same thing happens. Jalen Smith just got $27 million from the Bulls. Same thing. They developed his skills and made him better, and he fit really well. And that is all true. And like Haliburton got, like, you could even point to non-younger guys. Haliburton got better, obviously. Jordan Nwora, not as good, but still got better, right? Like, that makes sense for him to be like, yes, that team can help my career and help me get past this season in the NBA. The problem is the Pacers aren't in development mode anymore, right? So one is he's not going to have like as long of a leash as a lot of those guys did. And two, he won't play with Tyrese Haliburton, right? Like, those guys all at some point started or played with him. So like, Tyrese is the best guy to be like, yo, roll, I'll get you the ball. Like, I promise, just keep going, right? And that maybe it happens some, but not very often. So how he's able to click specifically with the bench, because that's what made Obi Toppin become a great fit, is when he fit a non-Tyrese Haliburton lineups, will be interesting to me. And the other thing you said is, if he can be a good screener, the Pacers have great point guards. Nembhard, Haliburton, and McConnell are all good at getting into the rim and using a screen. He'll get chances. So he's got to set good screens. And I don't watch a lot of James Wiseman, but I've watched enough to know that he's not been a good screener. So do you think he can do that? Because if not, I'll just be very intrigued by what he can get better at to actually help the Pacers this year if they need him to.
I will say this to end it off on a positive. James Wiseman wants to be good. He does not want to be a bust. Like, he said this himself. This past season with the Pistons, he had an interview. I forget what place it was, but he had an interview where he says he knows that everyone's calling him a bust. He knows this is where he's heading towards. He wants to avoid that. He does not want to be that. He's an incredibly hard worker. He's a good kid, very good personality. Like, the locker room's going to love him. He wants to be good, and he will put in the work to do so. Whether he can do it, like I said, he has flashes where he puts it together. Like, you'll see like maybe 2-3 game stretches where, okay, he's setting screens pretty well. He's rolling all the way to the basket. He's finishing around the basket. He's doing those things. He just hasn't ever been able to sustain it for long periods of time. And more so, I think things, I will say, offensively were clicking faster this year for him. So if he does continue to get better, I can see him clicking well offensively, because it did look like he was understanding, okay, my role in the NBA was I'm going to have to be a roller and just get lobs and finish around the rim. Like, that's going to be my role to last in the NBA. It felt like that was clicking for him. Defensively is just where I really have the concerns about it ever really clicking for him. But offensively, if you came back a year later and was like, cool, James Wiseman was a good screen starter, he did really good stuff for us offensively, I would believe it. Defensively is just where I feel like he still has such a long ways to go.
We just saw in the playoffs, these lob bigs were huge factors for lots of teams, except for the team that won the championship. But, lots of other teams had a lot of success with them, but those lob bigs were very good defensively. We'll see how Wiseman shakes out with the Pacers. For more on the Pistons, who the Pacers will play many times, including Khahil, in group play for the in-season tournament, baby. You can follow Khahil at Locked On Pistons. Khahil, where else can people find you and what you're doing? with the Detroit Pistons.
You can find me over on Twitter at Khahil, but that's really about it. Locked On Pistons at Khahil. I appreciate you having me on, and good luck for the rest of the season. Think you guys will be doing a lot better, so we'll see you in the season play. Hopefully, we can get some wins there.
The only crappy team that the Pacers were able to sweep last year was the Pistons, so at least they have that one going.
A lot of teams did it. A lot of teams.
Check out Locked On Pistons. Koo crushes it over there. We'll have more coming now on Johnny Furphy here to close this one out. Thank you all for listening to this one. One more break here, guys. We got to talk about the lovely folks over at Game Time, an authorized ticket marketplace of Major League Baseball, which makes getting tickets faster and easier. Prices on the Game Time app actually go down the closer it gets to the first pitch with killer last-minute deals, all-in prices, views from your seat, and their lowest price guarantee. Game Time takes the guesswork out of buying MLB tickets and other tickets. It's the best. I should know. I used it, and every advertised feature is awesome, right? The views from your seat, you can see it right in the app. It was spot on in the Barclays Center. From my experience, I knew I was getting a good deal because they have the Game Time guarantee. If you find cheaper seats in the same section row elsewhere, they'll credit you 110% of that difference. How about that? Tickets day of the game, which is fantastic, and all-in pricing. You can toggle that feature to see everything with no surprise fees. It's the best. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets and MLB tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use the code LOCKEDONNBA. You'll get $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. But again, create an account on the Game Time app, redeem the code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off. Download Game Time today. Last-minute tickets, lowest price, guaranteed. One more today. It's Johnny Furphy, the Pacers' 35th overall pick. They traded up to get Green Room invite, fell to them in the second round. Very fortunate in some ways in that way. And no one knows Johnny Furphy's game better here on the Locked On Podcast Network than Derek Johnson of Locked On Jayhawks, who you might have heard here before, as we talked about Grady Dick for several minutes ahead of the 2023 draft. And he has seen Furphy's collegiate career start to finish. Derek, were you surprised? I'll start with this, that he fell to the second round, and you liked what the Pacers were the team that he ended up with?
So if you would have told me right when the season ended that he would stay in the draft and go early second round, I wouldn't think it was that far-fetched. But after the whole NBA, I guess, lead up to the draft with there were certain reports that he was only working out for, teams like in that top 20 in that lottery range. Certainly it seemed like from his party, the word kind of back here was that he's going to go if he has that first round guarantee. There was a lot that made it think he was going to be a first rounder, certainly kind of a down draft in a lot of ways. And yeah, I think after the draft started, it was definitely a surprise that he wound up going in the second round.
Because to me, yeah, I don't know everything, but generally Green Room, which is submitted by teams, is a good sign that you're going to be a first rounder. So Pacers with a bit of fortune there. And I think it's so fascinating that this young kid is such a promising prospect, because he's even talked about this. Like a year ago today, he barely knew he was even going to Kansas. What did you kind of make of that journey for him, that the late deciding? I think a spot on Kansas opened up pretty late, right? If that's how it went, and how he was able to kind of quickly fit into that program.
So basically what happened was Kansas was looking to fill another roster spot late, and they'd already done this basketball trip to Puerto Rico. And then there was some stuff where, he kind of became this late rising prospect, and it was like, is he going to stay in the class of 2024 or where he would have been a freshman this year, or is he going to reclass up? And Kansas convinced him to reclass up and come across. He ends up joining the roster. And, he didn't get to be a part of that trip where they're going down and playing in Puerto Rico. And so he's coming off the bench at the beginning of the season and, showed a lot of good flashes. So showed some stuff that people were excited about what he would become. And eventually they figured, okay, maybe he can turn into a bigger role in here or two or something. But he ended up later in the season because Marco Jackson, who was their, 5-star McDonald's All-American, and Nick Timberlake, who was a grad transfer shooter that they brought in, neither of them really took down the starting role like they were kind of hoping or expecting to. And so Furphy got that opportunity to move into the starting lineup at kind of the beginning of Big 12 play. And that's when he kind of just took off. He was efficient in his time off the bench, but that's what was super impressive about when he became a starter, is that the efficiency kind of stayed there. In fact, it actually got a little bit better on higher volume. And he was there was probably an 8-game stretch where you could argue he was KU's best player during that 8-game stretch. Unfortunately, it didn't finish that way. February and March, I don't know if he was hitting a freshman wall or what, but the 3-point percentage went well under 29% over those last 2 months of the season. And you started to notice some of the flaws in his game a little bit more. But for a young freshman to overcome that, coming overseas from Australia, seeing the flashes of what he could be, I think it was really impressive overall in year one. And somebody who I was certainly saying that, if he comes back for year two, and this was middle way through the season, like I think he could be an all Big 12 first team type of guy, a Big 12 player of the year type candidate. So I think this is kind of buying in early if you're the Pacers and hoping that, yeah, if Furphy would have came back to college another year, like maybe he turns into a top 20 pick, maybe he turns into a lottery pick in another year.
So you kind of alluded to a lot of stuff I wanted to go into more detail on, but the first one was, a lot of what I've been reading about him was that rise from bench player, not even really with the team, to starting. And you mentioned the efficiency. What kind of stood out when he was not a starter yet to be like, oh, this guy could do more, or even with a bigger role, this guy, could be a player for this team?
Well, when he was coming off the bench, it was more of just very specified what he was being asked to do. It was basically shoot threes, mostly from the corner. KU had a lot of options to go to on the offensive end. They were really playing through the post. And so it was setting up actions for him to space the floor a little bit and hit those corner threes. And he was doing that. And then it was score out in transition, which he did an excellent job of. The other stuff we didn't really see as much of. The rebounding was something that I was really impressed by with Furphy. Really good offensive rebounder. He was somebody who attacked the defensive glass pretty hard as well. Obviously, he'll be looking to add, weight to his frame and everything to maybe get a little bit better there. But that was something that I think came after he became a starter. But yeah, in the bench role, it was more of a limited, hey, you're killing it and what you're being asked to do. You're just not being asked to do a lot.
You're kind of nailing what he did in Summer League too. Like he could just get threes up whenever he wanted because he's smart and knew where the space was. When I was there for the 2 games, like we were right off the court. You could, the second the ball hits his hands on a rebound, like it's not getting tipped away. Like he's got it. And I remember, so sometimes when I dive back in on prospects, I watch best game, worst game first to kind of see the premise of like, okay, when they were great, what's good? And when they're not, what's going wrong? And so he had this Cincinnati game, I'm sure you remember well, where he had 23 and 11. And like the second the ball hits his hands, he gets it. So like, for not a strong kid, I was like, whoa, this rebounding's a thing, which is very impressive. So, it's very interesting that he's like, you look at him and you're like, oh, this is a movement shooter type, but he's got some like oomph to him despite the size. And that's why I think everyone's saying the same thing. It's going to be really interesting to see what he can become if he gets stronger, which he has to in the NBA.
Yeah, and the 3-point shooting, I'm sure a lot of people saw that one highlight of him catching the 3 and basically just keeping it up high and shooting right away. Like that's a really tough shot to have to make. And that's something that, like, I think Grady Dick, if we're comparing just the KU shooters, was a little bit more of a complete all-around shooter than Furphy is coming out. And again, Furphy shot, under 29% his last 2 months at Kansas. But overall, the samples or the overall, freshman shooting was still good for him. But that was one thing that I noticed better with Furphy. It seemed like he had a little bit quicker of a release to go against guys, at least if you're just comparing freshman to freshman season. And I think that's like kind of a great fit for the Pacers, for the NBA in general. Like there were a lot of questions about his half-court offense, his dribbling, his creation and stuff. But if he's never going to be asked to be the guy, if he's going to be asked to be a bench player, if he's going to be asked to be a role player as an eventual starter, it's going to be to hit threes. It's going to be to score in transition. And those are things that you probably do more in the NBA than you had an opportunity to do in college basketball.
Yeah, if you jump to his synergy page, like his best 2 play types, transition and catch and shoot, like exactly what the Pacers will ask him to do for the first several years of his career. Transition's interesting. You hit on that a second ago. Kansas had a pretty good defense. They got out a lot. Like what made him pop in the open floor? Was it that he knew where the space was? Was it that he finished well at the rim? Like why was he so effective there?
Well, I think there were a couple things that helped him, and he'll obviously have this with Tyrese Haliburton with the Pacers. Really good point guard in terms of passing the basketball. And that was the thing with Kansas. They were number 1 in the country in assists per field goal made rate. So part of that was because they didn't have a bunch of guys who could get shots off the bounce. So like they had to do it that way. But point guards getting 6-7 assists per night. Their big man, Hunter Dickinson, is getting a couple assists per night. And he was an excellent outlet passer. KJ Adams, who was their other kind of big man power forward, he's getting a couple assists per night. He would lead the break. And so you had these 3 guys with your point guard, your 2 big men who could either do outlet passes or lead a break. And so what ends up happening, you need somebody else who's smart about cutting, knowing what lane to fill. And I thought Furphy did an excellent job at that. He knew what lane to fill. He knew where to be, and he was the recipient. When you combine that with a good passer of, hey, I'm going to get an easy dunk because of this, or I'm going to throw down an alley-oop, or I'm going to break away because of this. I think really good instincts with that for Furphy, and that's what led to a lot of that stuff. We saw some good dunks from Furphy, but honestly, if you want to go back and watch some of his NBA Global Academy, like high school stuff, some of those dunks he threw down are even more impressive because those are over some bodies.
Yeah, he had his first dunk in Summer League. I was, whoa, Furphy guy. Or was he call himself? I don't know if everybody calls him Furf, but he calls himself Furf, so I got to call him Furf. Furf got up on that. Look at that. Maybe that will be a thing we're tracking. And the transition's just such a natural fit, right? Like all the Pacers draft picks, really. I don't like they did transition drills in pre-draft workouts, and every single guy they drafted had really great open floor stats at the college level. Like clearly something they emphasize with the way they're going to play with Haliburton on their team and with this style that got them one of the best offenses of all time. Last question here. This is kind of vague, but how would you describe his NBA outlook? Like, do you think he can become a really good starter, just a normal rotation player? Like his archetype is fairly in demand, especially if the threes fall, but is it all based on that? How do you kind of see his career panning out?
Yeah. So there's two things that could certainly raise the ceiling a little bit. I think at the very least, he'll have a nice long career as being a good 3-point shooter, transition player, lengthy wing. Like you're going to be able to play him kind of 3 and 4. We see those guys have long careers in the NBA. So I think you're kind of starting there. What's going to determine whether he hits that next level, becomes a starter, whether he becomes a really good player, averaging, I don't know, north of 15 points per game or whatever ends up happening there. One would be, what does his half-court creation eventually become? Because at Kansas, that was just kind of non-existent. If you go and find the second Cincinnati game when they played in the Big 12 tournament, Kevin McCullough, Hunter Dickinson, the two leading scorers for KU, are out with injury. He was asked to do more, and he just couldn't beat anybody off the bounce or really do anything off the dribble. Now, he's still obviously very young. That can come. It might be 2, 3, 4 years before that all comes together. Or does he just get pegged into his specific role, and that never comes around? So then the other one would be his defense. The defense was not very good at Kansas, kind of put bluntly, but I thought he always gave a lot of effort. And when I'm looking at young players and trying to determine how good are you going to be on the defensive end, there's a couple things I look at. Like one, are you really athletic? Are you really long? Like that certainly helps. The other thing is, do you care on that end? Are you going to try on that end? Now, Furphy doesn't have like the longest wingspan. I think he's pretty athletic. We'll see how athletic he is in terms of like, I guess, agility and stuff. But I think because of his at least height, 6'8", 6'9", because he's a good defensive rebounder, because he wants to be good on that end, I think he can at least be a good team defender. And if he can be just an average defender, which I think he has the smarts and want to do, along with 3-point shooting, like, yeah, I think you're talking maybe down the road as being a possible starter on a playoff team.
Yeah, I think if you read the floor as well as he does in transition, that feel will translate to something else of some success in that way. There's just a scale of like, is this a Corey Kispert, Doug McDermott player? Is this, a step above that? Is this a step below that? That's kind of where this range could be. And it all kind of starts to me with what else beyond the shooting will translate. Because it's so obvious, even in Summer League, where his stats weren't that good, that he was like effective and knew how to play and knew how to get threes up. I'm looking forward to watching him. And you cover him and the Jayhawks perfectly over at Locked On Jayhawks. Where can people find you and your coverage of Kansas, who always is turning out NBA players that the Pacers love, sometimes draft? Kevin Pritchard's a Jayhawk. It's the program for him.
Yeah, exactly. Little Kevin Pritchard action there. We always love him back here with everything that he did at KU. So anyway, it's at D Johnson Radio on Twitter, Locked On Jayhawks, anywhere you get your podcasts, and including on our YouTube page as well. So thanks, Tony. I appreciate it, man.
This was great. I hope everybody learned something new about the new guys. Be back very soon.